Hi there, everyone. Mychal A. Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology. And today we're going to dive into our free Horary Astrology Masterclass. In this masterclass, we're going to discuss what divination is as a practice, or rather as a group of practices, where Horary Astrology falls within that, and fundamentally how we can use Horary Astrology both within our personal lives as well as within our client practice to attain more concrete, clear, event-based predictions within our work as astrologers. Now, as all of you know, I recently wrote a book, and not that recent actually, but I think 2 years ago at this point, I wrote a book on Horary Astrology entitled Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, a concrete guide to astral divination. So if any of you are wanting to know about my approach to Horary Astrology, why I practice Horary Astrology the way I do, and where Horary Astrology falls within the larger context of my own astrological practice, then this is the book. This is the textbook that we teach from at the Oraculos School of Astrology. It's the textbook that I teach from when I teach in other spaces that aren't the Oraculos School of Astrology. And it's definitely the textbook that's going to be guiding us in our upcoming Horary Astrology certification program, which begins this January 10th, 2026. I hold it like this because this is a version of the book that isn't actually for sale. And so on the front cover, it says not for resale. And I don't want you all to see that part. So I usually hold it like this. But this is the book. And who knows, maybe one day I'll even do a series on book writing as an astrologer and how to go about that in an effective way. But today we're here to talk about Horary Astrology. And before that, I think it's important for us to talk about divination as a topic. For those of you who don't know, I've been a practitioner of divination for over 20 years at this point, and my divinational practice started not necessarily within the context of astrology, but it started with the Kabbalistic Tarot. It started with the runes, the actual rune stones, the 24 rune stones. It started with the I Ching, and ultimately it settled and rooted itself within the context of a horary practice. So what is divination? Is the very first question. One of the definitions, or the definition that I provide for divination within this book, is that divination is the art and science of communicating with the divine via an established symbolic language. Divination is the art and science of communicating with the divine via an established symbolic language. And to that end, any tool that we use within the context of our practice that gives us the ability to be in divine communication is essentially a tool of divination. Now, within that, I say it's the art and the science. And maybe I should say it's the science and the art and put the science first, because every system of divination has its own internal structure of rules and rubrics that we have to apply in order to bring that system of divination to work and to life within our own lives. So when we're practicing the I Ching, for example, and once again, it's Yi Jing, it's not I Ching. And I oftentimes find myself having to say that to people, that we don't say I Ching, it's Yi Jing. And if you had to spell it out, it would be Y-I-J-I-N-G, Yi Jing, not I Ching. So when we're practicing the I Ching, for example, that has an inbuilt system of rules. There are 64 hexagrams, and there are two primary ways of generating those hexagrams. And when we generate a hexagram, that hexagram essentially holds within itself the content that is necessary to answer our question within that moment. Similarly, the tarot has its own internal framework and its own internal system. There are 78 tarot cards, and those 78 cards are divided into 22 major arcana cards, 3 aces, 16 court cards, and 36 numbered cards. And those cards collectively represent the oracle from which we derive meaning when we're practicing tarot, whether it's Kabbalistic tarot or a tarot of some other orientation. When we're practicing the runes, Runemal, which is a traditional system of divination that comes to us out of ancient Norway and out of ancient Germanic cultures, when we're practicing that, there are 24 runes. And the ways in which those runes are constructed represents a technical part of that, but also how we interpret those runes when they land in juxtaposition with each other also represents a technical component. So everything is having its technical component. Every system of divination that has stood the test of time has within it a scientific basis that allows for that system of divination to work, or that allows for that system of divination to operate within a specific set of parameters that have been established since time immemorial. And we ourselves, as practitioners, we plug ourselves into those parameters and we allow ourselves to practice divination within the container of that specific practice. Geomancy, which is the sister of Horary Astrology, is a topic that I truly love more than anything else in the world. And within the context of geomancy, that is having its specific associations between the 16 geomantic figures and the signs of the zodiac and the parts of the body and the planets that rule those figures. So all of these systems, they come with their inbuilt logic or their inbuilt rubric. And ultimately, the purpose of every system of divination is to give us access to the part of the universe that is all-knowing. Now, some of us call that God. Some of us refer to that as the gods. Others of us refer to that as Great Spirit. I myself, because of my own early childhood orientation towards spirituality and towards earth-based spirituality, I might say Mother, Father, Divine, but I might also say Great Goddess, because that is within the context of my own spiritual practice. So we all have some understanding or some idea of what the divine means to us. And there are people who don't necessarily believe in the divine in any sort of personified sort of way and view the divine as an intelligence that is just represented everywhere within our universe. And so they refer to that divine as great cosmic intelligence. But it doesn't matter what you refer to the divine as. If you're coming into the practice of divination, the very first thing that we have to know is that there is some acknowledgement of some divine source larger than ourselves. And that whatever wisdom we can give our clients within that moment of giving a reading is wisdom that's being drawn not necessarily from the technical thing that we're doing in the front of us, but from that larger divine source itself. And the same is true for Horary Astrology. And I think that when it comes to astrological practice, we as a community of astrologers, we don't necessarily focus or hold on to this idea of astrology being an extension of a larger body of divinational tools. And we don't necessarily think about astrology as giving us the ability to talk to the divine, because astrology is so technical. And the ways in which astrology is technical are ways that don't seem divine at all. Those ways seem like, oh my God, I have to calculate the distance between these two planets, and I have to know that that distance equals a square, and I have to know the difference between a dexter square from a sinister square, and I have to know that the first house means this and the second house means this, and when the rule of the first house is in the 10th house, it means this, and when the south node is in the first house, it means that. We have a language, essentially, as astrologers, a celestial language, a language of the stars, as it were, and that language is such that if we allow ourselves to only view it from the perspective of it being a technical way of communicating, it's very easy for us to kick the gods out of the temple, essentially. But ultimately, I think it's important for all of us to understand that astrology is just as much an extension of a larger body of divinational practices and a larger body of magical practices, and that astrology as a system was the original divination and it was the original magic for many of our ancestors. So when we now move into the realm of the art side of divination, this idea that divination is an art and science of communicating with the divine, that art side is that in the beginning of our practice, we have to establish a very real sense of what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it. And we have to abide by certain laws and certain rules that underlie that specific practice. So, for example, if I'm practicing Horary Astrology for the first time, I know that the first house is corresponding with the querent or the person who's asking the question, whereas the second house is corresponding with the money of that person, whereas the third house is corresponding with the siblings of that person. So in a given reading, I can turn around and say, today, I'm going to choose that the first house should represent the money of the querent, and the second house should represent the querent, because the rules that underpin our understanding of divination have been around longer than we have. And to that end, we have to respect those rules, and we have to practice our divination in a way that continues to honor that traditional aspect of things. But after we've come to a place where we've honored that traditional aspect of things, and after we've done that for months and months and years on end, we start to develop a level of freedom within our divinational practice that allows us to take it from simply being a technical skill that we apply to life, but it allows us to really feel as if we are indeed in communication with a part of the universe that is greater than ourselves. And that's the point at which our horary practice and our astrology practice in general moves from just being a technical skill that we practice to being a deeply spiritual art form that we step into. And that's essentially where we're all trying to move with our divinational practice. In the same way as I can speak with you with this level of fluency and this level of English, is the same way that we're desiring to bring our ability in whatever system of divination we're practicing so that we have that same level of fluency and that same level of understanding, essentially. So that's the art and the science of the divination. The communication piece is the next piece, because the definition is that divination is the art and science of communicating with the divine via an established symbolic language. The communication piece within the divinational process is important because that communication assumes that there is something within us, or there is something within our earth plane that we need to speak to the divine about, but it also assumes that the divine is going to equally speak back to us about it. And this is what brings me to what I think is the most important part of any divinational practice: the question. The question is the most important part of any divinational practice because a question, a well-crafted question, holds within itself a momentum and a yearning and an earnestness that goes directly to the heart of the cosmos, that goes directly to the heart of God. So as far as this being a Horary Astrology Masterclass is concerned, the very first thing that we need to know is that the question is the most important thing that we will ever do or that we will ever generate within the art or the act of divination, the question. And there is no divination that is devoid of a question, because the question is essentially the catalyst for the entire divinational process. So sometimes people come and they say, hey, I want a general reading, or hey, I don't necessarily have a question per se. Then that isn't necessarily well suited for divination. Because when we come to divination specifically, we're coming with the knowledge that there is a question that this person has, and there's an answer that I'm going to give them from within the heart of whatever this practice is. So I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see what's going on over here. So this is our Horary Astrology Masterclass. And the number one thing, or the first thing for us to know within the context of Horary Astrology and any system of divination in general, is that the question is the catalyst for that system that we are practicing. The question. A well-crafted question essentially carves a hole into the heart of the cosmos. A well-crafted question, a question that really arises from the heart of deep yearning and burning and desire, it leaves a vacuum within our universe. And we know that the gods and the universe cannot afford for there to be a vacuum within it. So in the same moment as we craft a well-crafted and a powerful question, and it creates that hole within universal space, that hole is automatically refilled by a divine answer in the exact moment of us asking that question. So that is how powerful a question can be. And this is why the ancients tell us that if we're going to do Horary astrology or any system of divination, we need to give ourselves time to think about that question. And time can look like 3 days, or maybe you already come to the Horary astrology session already knowing what your question is and knowing why you want to be there. But the point is that we have to give ourselves time to craft questions in a way that is solid, that's grounded, and that's actually rooted in a heart of need. Need. It could also be rooted in the heart of desire. But ultimately, the most powerful Horary astrology questions, the most powerful divination questions, the questions that give us the most clearest and the most direct answers from the cosmos are those questions that are singular within ourselves and also crafted out of a heart of utter need. That's one of the things that I've been seeing more and more as I get ready to write my next book. That's one of the things that I've been seeing more and more within the books of ancient geomancers. When they speak about a person coming to geomancy and asking their question, they speak about the level of earnestness and the level of angst, essentially, and the level of need that question has to be fused with in order for it to be a valid question. So the first thing that we have is that our question shouldn't be flippant. Our questions shouldn't be flippant or nonsensical. Basically, our question shouldn't be stupid. I thought nonsensical was a word all my life. Oh, it is a word. It just doesn't have a dash. So basically, our question shouldn't be stupid. The next thing that we need to know in terms of crafting our own questions is for us to also know that not only should they not be stupid, but our questions have to be rooted within either ourselves or something that is directly important to us. Our questions have to be rooted in either ourselves or something that is directly important to us. This is the second thing. Now, this is very important for me as a topic because today, in today's current Horary Astrology economy, I continuously find myself as a teacher, as somebody who teaches classes, I continuously find myself confronted by people who've learned from other popular horary astrologers or other popular horary astrology teachers that they can ask anything. And insofar as they can ask anything, the universe has to stop what it's doing and come to a screeching halt to answer that person's specific question that they just so happen to choose to ask while they're lounging on their couch. They want to ask who has the nuclear codes for releasing the secret weapons from the Pentagon, and they feel as if the universe has to provide them an answer because they have a certificate in horary astrology from this world-famous astrologer who is the next thing to Jesus as far as being a mouthpiece from God. And I think it's utterly ridiculous, and I think it's utterly stupid, and I also think it's utterly dangerous that for those of us who teach astrology, we don't teach astrology within a container that actually allows our students to be closer to reality. We teach astrology within the container that pushes them further from reality. So for example, during the election, there are horary astrologers left, right, and center casting charts to find out who is going to be the next president of the United States of America, because they learned from their own popular horary astrology masters or gurus or teachers that they have a right to asking that question. The people who were casting those charts weren't the candidates in the election. We weren't seeing Donald Trump and Kamala Harris cast charts equally, or we weren't seeing any of them do anything as far as astrology is concerned, truthfully. But we had astrologers left, right, and center casting charts to determine who would be the next president of the United States of America, because their horary astrology teacher told them that that is their divine right as a human being on this planet. Not as an enlightened human being on this planet, not as the Dalai Lama, but simply for being you. You have the right to ask the universe anything, and the universe should stop what it's doing to answer that. Similar to that, you also have the right to ask the universe if your next door neighbor is cheating on his wife, and the universe should stop what it's doing and give you that answer about those people's personal business. We have come to a particular level of idiocy within our horary astrology practice. And for those of you who don't have English as your first language, idiocy is derived from the word idiot. We've come to a particular level of idiocy within our horary astrology practice and within our practice of astrology in general, but we're not talking about that. Within our horary astrology practice that causes us to think in a way that defies all logic. So, in the same way as if you were to go to your counselor, for example, and you were to start asking your counselor questions about the government, or asking your counselor questions about who your next door neighbor is having sex with, or asking a counselor questions about everybody else in your life other than you, the counselor's job is to redirect you to yourself and to say to you, hey, this session isn't about who's going to be the next president of the United States of America, especially if you're not one of the contenders, especially if you're not one of the candidates. Sure, if you are a candidate, then yes, that question is within the scope of your possibilities to ask about. But if you're not one of the candidates, this question that you're asking has nothing to do with you, and it doesn't matter how important it is to you as an American to know the answer to that. That is beyond the scope of what you are allowed to bring to this counseling session. Similarly, if you were to ask a counselor about who your next door neighbor is having sex with, I am sure that any counselor who's worth their license would say to you similarly, hey, that is beyond the scope of your practice. And not only is it beyond the scope of your practice, what is the relevance of that to the larger container of you being here for a one-on-one counseling session with me right now? Are you asking, is the next door neighbor having sex with my husband, with your husband, or with your wife? Then that's a different question altogether. Because the minute you bring your wife into it, you make it a personal issue. The minute you bring your husband into it, you make it a personal issue. But insofar as you are on your couch and you just took a horary class and you feel like, oh, I need to practice some horary charts, let me go and inquire about my neighbor's life. Who are you? You understand? So we don't do that. And I think the first thing that's important in us crafting these questions, these powerful questions in Horary Astrology, is to understand that we have to be at the center of them. I once had a student, and every story that I have that starts with I once had a student ends with catastrophe. I once had a student who was of the impression that she should be able to ask. This was, I think, when was it? Was it when the Ukraine and the Russia and the war and the everything? I had a student who was of the impression that she should be able to ask about whether or not Russia would take nuclear action against the Ukraine. Period. Like that was the headline. And I was flabbergasted. All of my flabbers were gasted. Because I was like, how? how did we even arrive here? And so I tried to defuse the bomb, no pun intended, but I tried to bring it down and be like, hey, this isn't really a thing. This just isn't really a thing. Period. To which I get the backlash of, oh, Mychal, Bryan, you're trying to limit how we practice astrology because this other famous Horary astrologer, more famous than you, told me I could do it. Therefore, who are you, Mychal, to say whatever? So fine, do it. Do it and be my guest, but that's not the type of Horary astrology that I practice. That's not the type of Horary astrology I'm interested in breathing life into, because the reality is our divinational practice, a part of what makes it potent is the fact that it is rooted within the essence of our own soul desire. I don't even really like to answer questions when people come to me and say, is my daughter-in-law going to get pregnant? Is my daughter-in-law going to produce grandchildren for me? Which is something that people have come to me before, and they have come to me as a means of asking, should my daughter-in-law do whatever? Or is my daughter-in-law going to be a good wife to my son? That is definitely far more personal than asking about the Ukraine and asking about the nuclear bombs. But even then, I think we should ask ourselves, do the questions that I feel I'm asking come out of something that is genuinely needful for my specific individual personal life? Or do these questions that I'm asking feel as if I am infringing upon somebody else's right to make their own decisions? These are considerations. So I'm going to write this down over here. So we should ask questions to ask ourselves. Is the question I am asking rooted within that which is needful for my own life and my own personal experience of this world via my community, my intimate connections, and my immediate environment? So that's the question. Is the question I'm asking rooted within that which is needful for my own existence and my own personal experience of this world via my community, my intimate connections, and my immediate environment? Or Is the question I am asking something that infringes upon someone else's autonomy, someone else's autonomy, free will, and their own privacy? Their own privacy. Or is the question I am asking something that is altogether far greater than my personal existence, and therefore beyond the scope of my personal practice? These are the three questions, essentially, questions to ask ourselves as we craft our questions. Now, I saw a comment in the chat that asked about asking Horary Astrology questions for mundane events. This is something that I definitely speak about in my book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, a concrete guide to astral divination. And to this end of asking questions about mundane events, there's mundane astrology for that. You know, Jean-Baptiste Morin, who's an astrologer, there are certain things he wrote that I really enjoy, and then there are other things that he wrote that I don't enjoy because they're rooted in xenophobia, they're rooted in racism, they're rooted in all of these things that just feel problematic for me. But Jean-Baptiste Morin, one of the things that he did write in writing about Horary astrology was that if we are going to ask questions about global events, then we need to erect the charts of those global events. We need to be referring to the charts of those global events. If we're going to ask questions about people, we need to be referring to the birth charts of those people. We need to be speaking about the charts of those people specifically. If we're going to be talking about who's going to win an election, it makes more sense for us to look at the charts of the people in that election as opposed to casting a horary chart for that, which I think brings me to another point. And this other point is that traditionally speaking, as far as horary astrology is concerned, traditionally speaking, as far as all astrology is concerned, traditionally speaking, and then people say, Michael, who are you to talk about traditionally speaking? I'm the person who wrote the book Mastering Traditional Astrology. Traditionally speaking, as far as astrological inquiry is concerned, there is no astrologer. There is no astrologer that we can find at any moment in recorded history who, if given the opportunity to refer to a person's well-timed natal chart, would choose to read a horary chart instead. There is not even one astrologer who has ever said, let's read this horary chart instead. Oh, you have a well-timed birth chart? Let's just throw that to the side and focus on the horary chart. No one, ever, in the history of humanity. And I think a part of the reason for that is because we have always held within ourselves that your well-timed birth chart is the key to unlocking your natal promise and your destiny within this lifetime. Now, we have horary astrologers since time immemorial starting all of their books saying the same thing. The birth chart is the most important chart that will ever be referenced to a person in this lifetime. The birth chart is the be-all and the end-all. However, in the absence of a well-timed birth chart, or in the case or the examples of when a birth chart is unavailable for whatever reason, then the horary chart is the second best option. Because just as the birth chart represents the birth of the soul, the horary chart represents the birth of the answer of the question or the birth of the mind, in which case, as my question arises from my mind, in that moment that question is born, and in that moment, the chart that's erected for that moment of the question being born is the chart that contains within itself all possible future outcomes in relation to that question. So we don't have astrologers historically saying, let's go and use this horary chart instead of the birth chart at all, anywhere at all. because as far as person-based astrology is concerned, the greatest astrological tool that we will ever use for person-based astrology is going to be that person's natal chart. This is a part of why at the Oraculos School of Astrology for a very long time, I was very hesitant about teaching Horary Astrology as a standalone subject within itself, until this year, actually. I was very hesitant about teaching Horary Astrology as a standalone subject by itself because I felt as if we were creating a generation of astrologers who were accumulating tiny certificates. Certificate in Horary Astrology, certificate in electional astrology, certificate in predictive astrology or whatever, certificate in transits, certificate in Horary, certificate in electional, certificate in astrological magic, without knowing how to read the birth chart. How is this even possible that we can have certificate, and don't even know how to read the chart that represents the greatest compass of a person's destiny within this lifetime? So I didn't want to contribute to that. And so for the last, 5, 6, 7 years of teaching in this way and of teaching the curriculum that we offer at the Oraculos, I've always taught a course first called The Foundations of Classical Astrology. And that course was always divided into 2 sections. The first section was teaching you everything you need to know in order to practice astrology, none of which has to do with interpretation. And this is a thing. People think that people think that learning everything I need to know about practicing astrology teaches me automatically how to interpret. And there's so many technical things we need to know before we even land on our first interpretation. So sometimes in final exams at Oraculos, for example, and this is the last example, and I'm going to get back on course, I would say to students, hey, these 2 planets are in a parallel relationship by declination. What does that mean? And they launch into some long, verbose interpretation. Oh, this person has Venus, Saturn in a parallel relationship by declination. That means that this person is more than likely going to be subject to separation within their love life, or in their love life, they feel as if they're going to be in transactional relationships where the love doesn't actually flow as sweet and the romance isn't as sweet as they would like for it to be, because Venus Saturn has to do with love as an obligation as opposed to love as a wet and juicy expression of my romantic desire and connection to a person. Wow, blow me off of my seat, make me cough, is the sort of interpretation people go for. That's not the interpretation that I want from a level 0 student. From a level 0 student, I want you to tell me that if Venus and Saturn are in a parallel relationship by declination, that means that those 2 planets are occupying the same side of the celestial equator and the same degree while on that side of the celestial equator. So they're either in a parallel of declination because they both have southern declination and they're occupying the same degree, or they both have northern declination and they're occupying the same degree. Because as astrologers, we need to understand the technical antecedents. We need to understand the technical backdrop of what we're doing before we get into the interpretation. Anybody can interpret anything. Anybody can tell you your moon square Saturn means that your mother worked too hard and she probably wasn't the nicest person in the world. Anybody can tell you that your moon in Capricorn, Dorothea said that if you have moon in Capricorn, that means your mother was a slave. Maybe she worked too hard. Maybe she never showed up at home. Maybe she didn't have the wherewithal to take care of you as a person. Anybody can tell you these things. I can tell you moon Chiron means your mother this, your mother that, your mother everything. But what we need to get to is an understanding of the technique before we actually get into interpretation. Because if you only have interpretation and you have no technical ability at all, you are setting yourself up to have dead air. When you go into a reading with a person and you see things within that chart, you're setting yourself up to have dead air because all you have in your brain is the things you memorize from reading that one person's book about this combination in that person's chart. But because you don't have anything else there other than what you memorized from that one person's book, your interpretation is going to only be that far. It will go that far and no further. And then where to next? So we have to have a technical background. So that's the first part. But after that, I realized that people who were coming to study astrology, they also wanted to do something with it. They didn't just want to be technicians, they also wanted to be interpreters. So after teaching the technical side of things, we then went on into teaching the practical side of things, which is the skill side of things, which is Horary Astrology. Because for me, Horary Astrology is the entry point to learning astrology in general. After you learn everything that has to do with the foundations of classical astrology, and this also is true, we do not find any classical author for the most part writing an astrology textbook starting automatically with astrology technique. In every classical astrology textbook, there is some philosophy, there is some introduction, there is some, these are the things you need to know before you read this book. We don't start with interpretation because the interpretation is the last gasp of our livelihood as astrologers. Everything that comes before that interpretation, everything that makes that interpretation valid is what we have to know before we can even venture into interpreting what something means within somebody's chart. So after the technical piece has been established, then we go on into the practice of astrology. And for me, Horary Astrology is a place where that practice should take place. And the reason for that is because people come to us with questions. When a person comes to us with their natal chart only, they're coming to us with natal questions. So people come with questions. When a client comes to us with their natal charts, they are coming with lifetime questions. When a client comes to us for a horary reading, they are coming to us for temporal questions, questions in the moment. Temporal questions, questions that are born of the moment and that have a direct impact on this moment right now. But they're not coming with questions rooted within their entire lifetime destiny. But the point is, the horary reading is a reading based on questions, and the natal reading is a reading based on questions. Because even if that client asks no questions within the natal chart, every natal reading assumes the same questions. Who am I? Which is a first house question. What is the physical and physiological stories that I have come into this lifetime with? In other words, viz means in other words, viz, will I be healthy in this lifetime? And if not, in what ways am I likely to be unhealthy or fall ill? Which is also a first house question. Will I be rich? Which is a second house question. Will I have a happy family? / did I have a happy family? If I'm not going to disclose that information to you at the beginning of the reading, did I actually have a happy family? That's a third house question. Third and fourth house question. Will I have children? What will my relationship with my children be like? That's a fifth house question. If I am to be sick, in what will the nature of my sickness be? Sixth house question. Will I get married? What will the nature of my relationship be? Seventh house question. Will my spouse be rich? Eighth house question. Will I travel? What will I study? What will my relationship to religion be like? Ninth house question. What will the nature of my career be like? And will I be successful within my chosen occupation? 10th house question. What will my salary be like from my chosen career? Will I have good and trustworthy friends. 11th house question. What are the stupid things I do to myself that ultimately make me feel as if I'm shooting myself in the foot? Also, will I be subject to chronic health issues? Also, what are the parts of my life that bring the greatest amount of pain that I actually would rather not speak about? 12th house question. These questions are the questions that exist within every natal reading. When somebody comes for a natal reading, if you really wanted to be comprehensive within that reading, these are the questions that we should specifically be asking, or these are the questions that we should already be primed to answer. Because our clients don't have the language to know that these are the exact questions of the 12 houses within the natal chart, but we as astrologers have to go into that reading with the understanding of these being the lifetime questions that everybody has. I have them, you have them, we all have them. And if you feel like, hey, I'm not supposed to be married in this lifetime, your birth chart shows that. Which means in the event that you did ask that question, your birth chart has already provided an answer, because all astrology is rooted in the idea of inevitability. Now, I realize that we live within a day and age where there's a big conflict between fate and free will, and we all like to feel as if we're the masters of our own destiny, and as if we make things happen the way how we're going to make them happen, and is nothing fated within this lifetime. And it's interesting that people are more accustomed, or people like more the word destiny than they like fate. No one likes to say fate because fate sounds like that quote from the movie The Ring. Oh, I'm going to die in 7 days. So nobody likes to talk about fate. But somehow we like destiny because somehow destiny feels nicer and smoother and sexier to our eardrums than fate, when essentially they both mean the same thing. But when we practice astrology, whether it's Horary Astrology, whether it's natal astrology, we're practicing a system that's fundamentally based on this idea of inevitability. And that inevitability is based on the idea that there is a momentum that was established in the universe from before we were even born. And when we were born, our birth chart recorded a particular slice of that momentum. And for the most part, those of us who live our lives unconsciously, we live our lives in complete conformity with that momentum. So it's not that we don't have free will. We do have free will. However, few of us actually use that free will, because the reality is that our birth chart shows the things that have the most momentum, the things that we just do naturally. Whether those things are good for us, whether those things are bad for us, our birth chart shows us at our most comfortable, regardless of whether that comfort level is toxic or not. It shows who we are as a person who is unwilling to change. That's what we see within our birth chart. Now, this idea that we have the ability to turn back the hands of time, or that we have the ability to change the content that exists within our birth chart, is a powerful tool. And I'm reminded of Abraham ibn Ezra, who was a medieval astrologer, who said that astrology doesn't affect Jews. That was his specific statement. He said, the rules of Mazalot. Mazalot is referring, every sign of the zodiac is called the Mazal, and the signs of the zodiac collectively are called Mazalot. And he said that the laws of Mazalot do not affect Jews. Now, in the 21st century, my interpretation of what he meant by saying the laws of Mazalot do not affect Jews is that if you are living a life of some level of reflection, if you are living a life where you are consciously planting things within your life that allow you to break the momentum, and that allow you to reflect upon yourself, and that allow you to reflect upon your life, and that allow you to lead a contemplative life, then that momentum that's present within your birth chart should not affect you in the same way as it affects everybody else. And it doesn't matter if you're a Jew, or if you're a person who practices yoga, or if you're a person who practices Reiki, or if you're a person who practices some form of meditation or some form of contemplative existence. If you have a contemplative practice, the same momentum that runs over everybody else in your life should not run you over, because that momentum is the part of us that naturally reacts on autopilot. And as a contemplative person leading a contemplative lifestyle, you should have no autopilot, because everything that arises out of you should be born out of a seat of consciousness. Now, this sounds wonderful to say on paper, but that is what true free will is. True free will is looking at the way how you usually would react and choosing to do something different. However, how many of us don't do that? How many of us still go downstairs and shout at our boyfriend? How many of us still shout and curse at the stoplight because we are rushing late for yoga class? So we're shouting and cursing at the person who's just, on their way moseying around, not having anything to do on this Sunday morning, and they just feel like, oh, let me just drive in the front of you and drive slow as a slug. And so we find ourselves shouting, and we know that, hey, from a contemplative place, I really shouldn't be shouting. How many times have we, as people who have a spiritual practice, caught ourselves in the midst of doing and saying something that we know we really shouldn't be doing or saying? And there's a part of you, the part of you that actually has that spiritual practice, goes off in your brain and says, hey, I really shouldn't be doing this right now. I really shouldn't be saying this right now. However, you still say it because there's a momentum, and the momentum feels comfortable. So free will, in the grand scheme of things, is being willing to turn back the tide of that momentum and being willing to be in conversation with ourselves every moment we find ourselves wanting to be reactive. And instead of being reactive on autopilot, choosing to establish a new path for ourselves. That's the true free will. And as much as we think that we're all capable of doing that, few of us really are. How do we get on this topic? We got on this topic because we were talking about the lifetime questions that exist within our birth chart versus the temporal questions that we would come to a Horary Astrology reading for. And those temporal questions sound like, and I'm not going to write all of them down because a temporal question could be anything. But those temporal questions could be, should I take this job offer? Will I make money on this deal? Will my father and I ever reconcile with each other? And truthfully, these evers questions, for me, honestly, when a question has the word ever within it, that automatically kicks it off of the list of temporal questions and bumps it onto the list of my lifetime questions. Because whenever I ask a question that has the word ever or never within it, so let me write down lifetime questions, or the evers and the nevers, or the evers and the nevers. Whenever I'm asking a question that has ever or never built within it, that for me is a question that is a lifetime question. So will my father and I ever reconcile with each other? It's a burning question, and if it's burning in that moment, then sure, we could answer it using a horary method, but ultimately, that question is something that we'll see within the horary chart. And the most famous question in the world is, this person my soulmate? And later on, as we wrap up this presentation, we're going to be taking a look at some of these questions. Particularly, this last question, is this person my soulmate? Because those soulmate questions are the ones that usually get asked the most. Because we all like to feel like we're evolved. We all like to feel like we are sitting in the lap of Krishna. We all like to feel like we're grown adults and we're making evolutionary choices within our lives. But when you spend that $175 for that horary reading, the only thing that comes out of your mouth is this person my soulmate? Am I supposed to be with this person? Is this person the love of my life? Should I divorce my husband? Those are the questions that people ask more than anything else. These questions that are rooted in this fundamental lifetime angst of who should I be with?